this town we call home. Everyone hail to the pumpkin song.
Tell me, madame, is this not so? Hello everyone and welcome to day 9 of Terrorthon, Deathly Detectives. In previous years we've touched upon the era before a single horror movie or movie period was ever released, and that is also the aim today. You may not think of detective murder mystery novels as horror, but back in their day that was the equivalent, so they're a very important piece of horror history, and I think it's important that we understand the history of the detective novel in order to gain a complete understanding of how modern horror came to be. For those unfamiliar with the concept, it's very simple. Someone or someone's is murdered, and a detective has to unravel the identity of who did it and why did they do it. And that's pretty much it, with the occasional twist here and there. That's the basis of the detective murder mystery novel. And they're also known as whodunits, if you've ever heard that phrase before. So to trace the roots of the detective novel, we're going to rewind all the way back to the early 1800s during the Industrial Revolution. In the Industrial Revolution, there were a lot of people who were moving to cities as opposed to their hometowns for work, and this would increase their suspicion, uncertainty and paranoia of strangers. And the first form of media to capitalise on this newfound paranoia were known as penny dreadfuls. They were little magazines with stories you could buy for a penny in the United Kingdom, and they would feature the exploits of criminals, detectives and occasionally the supernatural as well. And they've since been referred to as the video game equivalent of the Victorian era. However, the first full story, the first modern detective story, was Edgar Allan Poe's The Murders in the Rue Morgue, released in 1841, and the detective novel was so new at this point that the word detective had not even been used in English before this. And the first detective novel that's often considered the first real one, if you like, was called The Moonstone, and it was released by the author Wilkie Collins in 1868. And this is known as the first true one because it established all of the classic tropes that are still used in detective novels to this day. And then, in 1887, perhaps the most famous character of all time was born, Sherlock Holmes, created by author Arthur Conan Doyle. His first work was called A Study in Scarlet, but he would go on to write 4 novels and 56 short stories starring Sherlock Holmes until 1927. There have been over 25,000 different interpretations of Sherlock Holmes, and in fact he holds the Guinness World Record for the most portrayed human literary character in film and TV history. Absolutely insane. The years 1920 up until 1939 later came to be known as the golden age of detective fiction for 2 main reasons. One, we still had Sherlock Holmes novels coming out, but someone else entered the fray around this time, Agatha Christie, and she released her first work, The Mysterious Affair at Styles, in 1920, but she would later go on to write 66 detective novels. And she created 2 of the other most famous detectives of all time, Hercule Poirot and Miss Marple. And to this day, Agatha Christie holds the Guinness World Record for being the best-selling fiction writer of all time. Of course, by the 1920s, movies were coming out as well, including horrors. And even back then, even in the silent movie era, there were adaptations of Agatha Christie and Arthur Conan Doyle works. So detectives were very much in vogue for a very long time. Even as early as the 1920s, though, readers were very critical of detective novels being very unrealistic and far too clean, and so a new subgenre was born, the hard-boiled detective novel, which also would deal with corrupt cops and organised crime. And this genre really took off in America in the 1930s, culminating in the release of The Big Sleep in 1939 by author Raymond Chandler, which would later go on to create the film noir genre of movies, which has nothing to do with horror, so we won't be going there. And that essentially leads us to the present day, where detective novels are more popular than ever. We've got the likes of Inspector Morse, the author Ian Rankin, and of course the character Alex Cross. So detective novels are still going strong, and we have a lot to thank them for in the creation of horror and horror history. Thank you for watching. See you tomorrow.